So we have the likes of Eddie Alvarez versus Justin Gaethje for the Ultimate Fighter finale. Very much like Eddie Alvarez. When Eddie Alvarez came over to the UFC, I think his first fight was against Donald Cerrone. He had a belt in Dream. He had a belt in Bellator. He had a couple of great fights with Michael Chandler. But as far as the casual fan is concerned, we never saw him against the cream of the crop in the UFC. I just pulled up Justin Gaethje, and outside of Michael Johnson, who he beat back in July of this year, the other notable fights he has is a win over Melvin Guillard in 2014, who was a dominant fighter, had about 70 MMA fights, but a couple of outside issues were giving him... We never got a chance to see the best Melvin Guillard that we could have possibly seen. The Melvin Guillard who was a world beater, who was training at Jackson's MMA. So I can't say anything with a. There's another kid by the name of Bibiano Fernandez. He's a featherweight fighter, and he's been beating the world, but we never got to see him fight a Demetrius Johnson. We never got to see him fight an Ian McCall or a Sergio Pettis. So fighting's different. Like a pitcher, when he throws a fastball 98 miles an hour moving off the outside of the plate, you can it's going to translate the same from AA to Major League Baseball. With fighting, unless someone has a dance partner of commensurate experience and commensurate skill, it's real easy to look like a world beater when you're fighting in feeder promotions. Almost everyone in the UFC held gold before they got to the UFC. Obviously, there's guys that aren't, but Ring of Combat, CFFC, Legacy Fighting Championships, almost everyone we have come to the UFC, like they'll win a belt and either move to the UFC, defend it once or twice, and come to the UFC and see what the chops are made of. That's where champions meet champions. So with Eddie Alvarez versus Justin Gaethje, the last Eddie Alvarez that we saw, who was his last fight? No contest versus Dustin Poirier. Okay. That was a weird one. Eddie Alvarez was out on his feet in that. All right, now I remember watching that fight. Eddie Alvarez was on Queer Street. He was walking on borrowed legs, and he wound up turning the tides, and he got the best in an old-fashioned slobber knocker against Dustin. We might have watched that one together.
We did.
Okay.
Was that the one? What UFC was that?
That was UFC 211, which was Stipe and Jr. and Joanna and Jessica Aguilar.
I remember that. Dr. Tron was there.
That is correct. Dr. Tron was there. He was putting his dick in the mashed potatoes. All right, so Justin Gaethje moves well. He beat a guy named Nick Newell, who's a one-handed fighter from World Series of Fighting. I was a big fan of. You ever see him? He won I think it was a 155-pound belt at the time. I'm going to have to go with Eddie Alvarez just because we've seen him fight the likes of Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, Showtime Pettis, Rafael dos Anjos, Donald Cerrone. We know what Eddie Alvarez is capable of. Justin Gaethje might come in and shock the world and, win one versus Eddie. I don't know if he has the name power or the star power yet to really demand a title shot at 155 pounds. There's Khabib Nurmagomedov, who's fighting Edson Barboza. We're going to tackle that one next. I'm going to go with Eddie Alvarez, and I'm going to go with Eddie Alvarez by attrition. Just, his cardio is unbelievable. I'm going to look for him to push a pace, try to score a couple of takedowns. And, when Eddie Alvarez hits you, he hits you.